Hello YouTube, it's Frederick here, and today I'm going to show you guys how to replace the front brake pads and rotors on this 2016 Toyota RAV4. This is actually my girlfriend's car and I wanted to replace the brakes on it because it's been due and I always wanted to do this as one of my Christmas presents for her. And if you guys also wanted to change your own brakes on your car, don't be afraid because it's pretty easy to do it and I'm going to walk you through the process step by step. So before we start, I'm going to show you guys the tools that I'm going to be using to replace the front brake pads and the rotors on this car. Alright, so right here I got some new rotors and we also have some new brake pads and its hardware. We're also going to need some brake cleaner to clean the brake components of the car. Now, I have here my Milwaukee impact gun, but if you don't have any power tools, you can also use a breaker bar. I have here my flathead screwdriver and a 3/8-inch ratchet and some sockets. We need a torque wrench to torque the brake bolts to spec, and a rubber mallet or a hammer. We also need this brake caliper compressor. And we're going to need some silicone paste for the brake caliper guide pins and some anti-seize to lubricate our brake pads. And last but not the least, we need some blue thread locker. And as always, safety's first. Always wear protection. Over here, I have the jack stands, I have the chuck, and a jack, and the rolling chair. That one is optional, but your back will thank you later. So, let's get started. When jacking the car up, I like to do it from the side of the car. As you can see, I'm jacking up the car and I'm making sure that it aligns on the metal railing. Then, just keep pumping the jack until the car is high enough and the wheels are completely off the floor. Now, place the jack stands underneath that metal railing and adjust the height of the jack stands and make sure it is high enough so that the wheels are off the floor. And once that's done, we can now lower the car onto the jack stands. And make sure to do this on both sides, and once the car's front end is jacked up, we can now place the chuck on one of the rear tires. Just like so. Before I start removing the wheels, I always make sure to give the car a good shake to make sure that the car is jacked up good. And this is not going anywhere. Now to remove the hubcap on this car, just pop it off the wheel. When removing the lug nuts, I like to use my impact gun, and for this car, we need a 21mm socket. Then, we can take the tire off, and what I like to do is just to put the tire underneath the car just for extra protection in case the jack or jack stands fail. Here, I have my ratchet and I'm going to be using a 14mm socket to remove the brake caliper bolt. These are the two bolts that we're going to be removing. And once the two brake caliper bolts are off, I'm now able to remove the brake caliper and I'll put it on the side here, and I'm making sure not to put any stress on the brake fluid line so I don't cause any damage to it. Next is to pry off the old brake pads with a flathead screwdriver. And then we can get the other side. Nice. Next, I'm using a 17mm deep socket to remove these two brake caliper bracket bolts, and also make sure to check your owner's manual for these specifications because the bolt sizes depends on the car that you are working on. And with the second bolt off, we can now remove the brake caliper bracket and put it on the side. And now that the brake caliper bracket is off, I can now also remove the old rotor. Over here, I have the brake caliper bracket, and as you can see, it's very dirty. These brake caliper brackets have these brake hardware that you pop in place to help the brake pads move easily as we use them. They can also help with reducing noises and squeaks. Now, let's take a closer look. So I have these new brake hardware and I'm going to compare and look at the old brake hardware's orientation. I'm going to position the new brake hardware in the same way that the old brake hardware is facing, and then we can put that to the side. Rotate the brake caliper bracket and do the exact same thing on the other side. After that, I'm going to be using a flathead screwdriver to pry off the old brake hardware from the brake caliper bracket. just like so. I also like to use a magnetic parts holder to keep my bolts organized and so that I don't lose them. So here, we can compare the new and old brake pads. As you can see, the new brake pad is much thicker, but the old one is still not too bad. I also like to use ceramic brake pads on my cars because it works the best for me. And on the brake caliper bracket, it has two caliper guide pins that we need to remove and clean. It's a little bit tricky to remove, but what I like to do is to twist the bolt as I pull it. If you know, you know. Then we can remove the other bolt and then put it to the side. Next, I'm using a wire brush to clean the brake caliper bracket. Make sure to clean it as best as you can so that we can reduce noises and squeaks as much as possible. We can also use a brake cleaner and spray the brake caliper to clean the gunk off of it. And lastly, wipe the brake caliper bracket with a shop rag. We also need to clean the brake caliper guide pins before putting it back. So spray it with the brake cleaner and wipe it up with a shop rag. And here, with our clean brake caliper bracket, we can now take the new brake hardware and pop it in place, just like so. And make sure that the new brake hardware is facing the right way when installing it on the brake caliper bracket. Next, we're going to use the silicone paste to lubricate the brake caliper guide pins. So, just take the guide pin and lightly coat it with silicone paste. Just like that. Then, we can now install the caliper guide pins inside the brake caliper bracket, slowly, and I like to wiggle it around to make sure that the silicone paste spreads evenly. Now, we can do the other caliper guide pin, and then we can also install it back into the caliper bracket. Very good. So now, this is our finished product. We can now install this brake caliper bracket back into the car. Next, we need to wipe down the new brake rotor with a brake cleaner and a shop rag because they usually have oil or grease on its surface to prevent rust during storage. And don't forget to wipe down and clean the other side as well. Next, we need to compress the brake piston. And we're going to be using an old brake pad. Line it up against the brake piston. Next, we're going to take our brake piston compressor, twist this part so that it could fit between the brake caliper. And once in place, start twisting the handle clockwise. Keep twisting the brake compressor tool until the brake piston is compressed all the way. And as you can see here, the brake piston is flushed all the way. Good. Just like the brake caliper bracket, we need to clean this brake caliper with a wire brush. And then use a brake cleaner to spray it down. And then use a shop rag to clean the gunk off of it. And with everything clean, we can now install our new brake rotor. And what I like to do is I use a lug nut to keep the rotor in place. So when I'm installing the brake caliper bracket, the rotor doesn't wiggle around. Next, we need to put a little bit of blue thread locker on the brake caliper bracket bolts before installing them. This is a very important step because blue thread locker helps prevent bolts from loosening due to vibration as we drive the car. Now, we can just line up the holes on the brake caliper bracket and install the bolt. Make sure we do the same thing on the other bolt. And then we can use a ratchet to tighten the two bolts down. Next, I'm going to turn the wheel to the left so that I can get more leverage for when I torque the bolts down. For these brake caliper bracket bolts, I'm going to be torquing them down to 72 pound-feet. And before we install our new brake pad, we need to install this brake wear indicator. Now, I'm going to be using this anti-seize lubricant to help the brake pads move easily when it's being used. I like to put a little bit of anti-seize on the backing plate of the brake pad and a little bit on its side where it makes contact with the brake hardware. Make sure that you don't get any anti-seize on the actual brake pad because it can cause your brakes to fail. Now, we can install the brake pad on the brake caliper. Just pop it in place just like so. Then, we can install the brake pad on the other side. This one is a little bit more tricky, but just wiggle it around and it should fit in place. And now that the pads are on, we can now put the caliper over the bracket. Then, we can take this brake caliper bolt, add a little bit of blue thread locker on it, and screw it in. Do the same thing on the bottom bolt. Add some blue thread locker on it. And then screw it in. And for these bolts, I just use my ratchet and the 14mm socket to tighten them snug. Just like so. Good. Now we can turn the wheel facing front so we can install the tire. But before we put the tires back on, make sure to remove the lug nut that we put there earlier. And once the tire is on, I just use my impact gun to tighten all the lug nuts. And now we need to lower the car. So jack the car up just a little bit, just so we can remove the jack stands. And carefully lower the car. But only lower the car just as when the tire is touching the ground, because we still need to torque the lug nuts, and when torquing the lug nuts, make sure to tighten them in a star pattern. Once the lug nuts are all torqued down, we can now lower the car all the way, and then remove the chuck on our rear tire. Then, we can put the hubcap back on the wheel. Just pop it in place like so. Good. Next, we need to start the car up, and we need to pump the brake pedal to fill the brake pistons with brake fluid. Keep pumping the brake pedal until it becomes stiff, and you're all set. Also, make sure that there's enough brake fluid in the reservoir every time you change the brakes. And the very last thing to do is to take your car for a test drive. So, here I am, driving the car, and I'm making sure that the brakes feel good every time I come to a stop. I also like to test it on multiple stops before I head back home, just to be sure. And yeah, these brakes feel good and I'm satisfied with it. So there you go. That is how you replace the front brake pads and rotors on a car. I'll make sure to include all the tools that I use in this video on the description down below. And if you guys like to see other videos like this, please hit the subscribe button. And if you have any other questions, leave a comment down below. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you guys on the next one.